Hello and welcome to the latest Behind Enemy Lines podcast on the Blood Red channel as we preview the Carabao Cup final between Liverpool and Chelsea at Wembley. Jurgen Klopp's team are looking to move back in front of Manchester City in terms of the number of League Cups won, with both sides currently on 8 and no team having got their hands on more. Chelsea, meanwhile, have won the tournament 5 times, so a win for them on Sunday would move them within 2 of Liverpool. Joining me to give the lowdown on the Chelsea team that Liverpool will face is Daniel Childs, who is, of course, a Chelsea fan brand writer for Football London. Daniel, thank you for joining us again on the podcast. It's been a little while since we had you back on. Good to see you again. Are you looking forward to the game?
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Matt. Yeah, it's interesting how much has changed since, I think, was it a preview for the game in August in the Premier League, the 1-1 draw. So yeah, a lot has changed. And in terms of the final, I mean, it's quite bizarre given many of kind of Chelsea fans' frustrations over maybe the slump in the Premier League over winter, that Chelsea could end this month with 2 trophies after the Club World Cup. So it's kind of that weird thing with Chelsea is, in the Premier League, there's still a way to go. But, you know, in terms of the domestic and the Cup and European competitions, Chelsea seem to have a knack of reaching the business end of these tournaments regularly.
Yeah, you mentioned the Club World Cup there. It was obviously something that Liverpool won themselves a couple of seasons ago. I'm sure you're familiar with the kind of conversations around whether it matters or not. But it's an important trophy, isn't it? It was an important trophy for Chelsea to win. And that must be, a massive boost at any time, really.
Yeah. For me, it was never a case of whether it mattered or not. I think if you spoke to Chelsea fans months before this, it was the Super Cup because, after winning the Champions League, we lost that final against Atletico Madrid in 2012 quite badly, and we hadn't won that game for quite a while. So it was about beating Villarreal. But then the Club World Cup, because it was the last trophy for us to collect, really, under Abramovich. And you've got players like Cesar Azpilicueta, who now has the complete Grand Slam at Chelsea. Very unique for him to do that. And funny enough, coming into this game, I think N'Golo Kante and Marcos Alonso, if they were to win on Sunday, would have that as well. So there are emotional things about that, and just saying you're world champions, it felt a very special thing to have for the club. And again, it was quite dramatic. It was tense. It wasn't an enjoyable final. I think Liverpool had similar issues in their 2 games. It was very close, and Palmeiras ran us very close in the final. But to win that was absolutely massive, and hopefully it can give sort of more inspiration to win more trophies this season.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see the impact of that moving forwards. We talk quite a lot, don't we, about the winner of the Carabao Cup getting that perfect sort of boost in terms of the rest of this season. So that will certainly be interested. Just in terms of obviously the game this weekend, I mean, there's a few more injury doubts, I think it's fair to say, or certainly injury concerns for Chelsea than there are for Liverpool. We're actually recording this just before Thomas Tuchel's press conference to preview the game. But could you talk us through a few of the players who are maybe a little bit doubtful and sort of which ones are most concerning from your perspective?
So obviously Ben Chilwell's out for the season. I still kind of find it weird when Tuchel has to say that every press conference, because it should be sort of known now that Ben Chilwell isn't coming back, even though I desperately want him to. He's out for the season. Reece James is coming back into fitness. There was, I think, a hope a few weeks ago that this game he could be ready for. He could be on the bench, but I'd be absolutely stunned if he's starting this game, because he hasn't played since, I think it was December the 28th against Brighton. So, it's been a long road for him to get back to fitness. The 2 obvious ones are Hakim Ziyech and Mateo Kovachich. I don't know how many people watched our game against Lille. They both had to come off in the second half. From what I can gauge, it's a race to get back. In terms of their fitness, obviously we are recording this before Tuchel's presser, so I'm not sure. He may rule them out of the game. He may just continue with the doubt over whether they'll be ready or not. But they are 2 players who played well against Lille, specifically Ziyech, who's been in the best form of his Chelsea career so far. He scored in his last 3 Premier League games. So I think he would have absolutely been in line to start this game. And Kovachich, obviously, to Liverpool fans' regret, scored one of the greatest goals of the season, basically, the last time these two met. So both of those players, I think, is very touch and go over both. In terms of an injury boost, I guess you'd say, is that Mason Mount was on the bench on Tuesday, and there were some concerns before Palace that he wouldn't be ready for this game. But it seems like he has recovered in time. how ready he is in terms of match sharpness, I'm not entirely sure, but Mason was never going to miss this final because he is such a big game player for Chelsea, and obviously has a decent record against Liverpool himself. So yeah, I think that's covering everything, unless Tuchel reveals something in the presser that I don't know about. That seems to be kind of the general sort of injury concerns going into this game from a Chelsea perspective.
Yeah, Mateo Kovachich is a really interesting one. I don't watch him as much as I'd like to. I really do like watching him, except when he's playing against Liverpool. But he seems to have a brilliant game against Liverpool every time he comes up against them. I mean, is that something to watch out for as well? Is he one of those players? You mentioned there Mason Mount being a player who sort of steps up for the big games. It seems to me a little bit like Kovachich is as well.
Kovachich, before this season, I was one of many who had doubts about him. I think if you are someone who watches him sporadically, you probably see the aesthetically pleasing things about his game, his technical quality, the way he's able to be, it's a trendy term now, but press resistant. He's able to get out of tight areas very smoothly. But the problem with Kovachich has always been that final pass. It's once he gets past the press as kind of a central midfielder and he's driving forward, it's always that final pass, that final ball to be more effective in terms of his creativity. And, you don't always want to boil things down to assists, but, in terms of his creativity, there were serious questions about what he was providing in the team. And he does, and I think still has on occasions defense weaknesses going back the other way. Even though I think he's weirdly a really good and clean tackler of the ball, he does have these defensive lapses that have cost him in the past. But this season he's gone to another level creatively. This has been his best season at Chelsea, and of course that goal itself makes it look like he's an inspirational figure for Chelsea. That game in particular, him and Kante together, it was a ridiculous midfield performance. I mean, it just was in terms of their numbers. I think they weren't tackled or dispossessed, just some mental stats after that game. And that was probably Kovachic's. I'm not just saying this because of the goal. I think his overall performance that day was probably his best in a Chelsea shirt. And given the way Kovachich and Kante linked together against Lille as well in kind of that midfield and making it feel a lot more sort of dynamic and fast, especially against a pressing team like Liverpool, I'd want both to play because I just feel that Jorginho, despite his attributes, if Chelsea are looking to be a lot like really want to go at Liverpool, I think you do need more mobile central midfielders, and I think Kovachich absolutely offers that alongside N'Golo Kante.
If he's fit, then do you think it's pretty certain that it'll be him and Kante at the start?
It's tough to know because, like a lot of areas in this team, Tuchel is a coach that likes to rotate, and Jorginho didn't play the Club World Cup final. Kovachich and Kante started that game, but Jorginho has been a senior figure in this dressing room and he didn't play on Tuesday. So there could be a sense that, Jorginho is the fresh player to go here, and Jorginho and Kante was the Champions League winning duo in midfield. And if Chelsea want to play more of a counter-attack minded game, then maybe you do favour Jorginho in that sense. If Chelsea are looking to sit back, attract the pressure from Liverpool and then hit on the break like we did, I think, at Anfield quite well last year, then maybe he's leaning in that direction. But I feel out of Jorginho, Kovachich has been a really good player this season for Chelsea.
There's lots of options in attack as well. Obviously, we know the sort of forward options that Chelsea have are incredible. But I wanted to ask you about those, and in particular as well, Lukaku and Havertz. It seems like it's not quite going for Lukaku at the moment. Maybe not happening, but Kai Havertz is just another player that I just absolutely love to watch.
Another player that, I can understand why people like to watch him, but if you watch him week in, week out, it's not as flattering. I think in terms of his productivity this season, I still have doubts about him in the Premier League. I think he's only 2 Premier League goals this season, which, would probably surprise people if they watch some of his performances for Chelsea, that he doesn't have more. And general problem across Chelsea's attack, I mean, I think that, and I'm probably going to write something about this in terms of Chelsea are kind of Liverpool kind of give them the attack and recruitment style that I think Chelsea dream of in terms of the productivity of, say, Diogo Jota is probably the best example because Salah and Mane are like freakish in terms of their output. But I think Jota is kind of that player that was signed in the same summer as Havertz, and has proven to be such a brilliant attacker for Liverpool. Consistent numbers. I think, 17 goals this season? For Havertz, that would be a remarkable return. Kai Well, I think the great thing about Kai so far is he's proving to be a great final player, like a big game player. I guess, social media term clutch. He seems to step up in these big moments, which of course is great for Chelsea. And with you brought up Lukaku there. I think in terms of the style of football Tuchel wants to play, particularly against Liverpool, Kai played in the game at Stamford Bridge in January, and I think really hurt Liverpool in terms of his pressing from the front. And as I say again, I think stylistically what Tuchel is going for in this game, particularly off the back of the Lille performance, Kai could be used again here. I think about his movements behind the Man City defence in the Champions League final, and particularly the movements he could potentially make behind this Liverpool defence that could hurt Jurgen Klopp's side. It feels like Kai is going to play in this final. Whether Rom plays as well, I can't give you a firm answer on that because Rom is obviously a massive player. But I would lean towards Havertz starting over Lukaku at the moment.
And who would you sort of expect to see in the couple of positions around him if it was Kai Havertz as the kind of focal point? Who are the in-form options to look out for? Obviously, Ziyech is one of them, but there's that question mark over him. Is there anybody else that's in that sort of form?
It's tough because you can't, even though there is positivity about the other night. If you watched us against Palace, I mean, it was just absolutely dreadful. So our attack is nowhere near Liverpool City in terms of consistency, and it really is a case of kind of who you think on one occasion could do something. It's not, there doesn't seem to be a general connection, and even after one good performance, I'm very cautious to go, this is now the attack. Ziyech, if he's ready to go, I think he should start because he's been in brilliant form, which would probably mean that I think Mount starts this game. So it'd probably be Mount, Havertz, Ziyech. Christian Pulisic scored the other night, and of course he scored against Liverpool back in January. And he, out of kind of our wide players, I do think he's one of the better finishers within our squad. Just kind of as a natural eye and anticipation inside the box that I think a lot of Chelsea players don't have. He seems to just crop up in the right place, which I think is a very big thing. And coming off the back of a goal himself, he could be given another start here. But it's very tough to know. I would be absolutely stunned if Timo Werner starts this game. He has fallen so far down the pecking order at this point. His last Premier League start came on like December the 11th. So that kind of tells you, where he is in the picture. So I know there are probably Liverpool fans, because of the history between Chelsea, Werner, Liverpool, the sliding doors moment where he could have been at Anfield in 2020. I don't think he'll be playing this game. And Callum Hudson-Odoi, I think, has had some injury problems recently, so I'd be stunned to see him come back in as well. So I think it's a toss-up between the fitness of Hakim Ziyech. I think Mount probably starts, and Pulisic, because Pulisic has goals within him. So I think it'd be a big show of sort of trust in Pulisic if Tuchel starts him on Sunday.
In terms of the two teams then, I mean, we mentioned at the start that maybe the season hasn't quite gone how possibly quite a lot of people thought it might do for these two teams. 10 points, I think, the gap at the moment in the Premier League, but Chelsea do have that game in hand, of course. So I don't know, it's a strange one to assess. I wouldn't, from the outside, say that Chelsea have had a poor season, but is it more the case that Liverpool have just exceeded most people's expectations, do you think?
From a Chelsea perspective, I think that it's a fear going into the final part of the Premier League season in particular that it's kind of just the same again. Like Chelsea, this feeling that we're still behind Liverpool and Man City. And there's still a sense that there's still some way to go in terms of recruitment, in terms of the strength of our squad, the strength of depth, the style of play. That there still is that gap there that we hope would have been closed this season. I do agree with you that maybe because of Liverpool's struggles last year, it was kind of weird. I think that Chelsea's Champions League win and the brilliance of Tuchel kind of gave Chelsea fans and the whole club a sense of confidence over the Premier League season that probably shouldn't have been there based on history. And I think it was probably the opposite with Liverpool for a lot of people, where the history, other than last season, told you that this squad, when fit, competes for a Premier League title, or at the very least gets close to 80 points, scores a lot of goals, is very productive, is one of the top two teams in England. It kind of flips at the start of the season when people are like, I don't quite know if Liverpool are still going to be there. And obviously we've kind of reverted back to before last season. That's what it looks like at the moment. So for Chelsea, it's just simply, apart from this game, I think it's about closing that gap. It's getting to the end of the season and feeling like we're not a million miles away from Liverpool and Man City, because I think it's even worse having that gap to Liverpool, because, you want to be the closest challenger to City. It's not even about, closing the gap on City anymore. It's about being in the top three rather than having the top two distant and us being clawed back into the chasing pack for Champions League qualification, which is where Chelsea kind of need to get out of now. So that is kind of, I think, the big concern moving into next season. At Chelsea do need to close that gap and start to feel like they're making gains on both Liverpool and City, who have been the two outstanding teams for the past 5 years now.
What's the sort of aim then? Obviously, the Carabao Cup, you want to win that. The Champions League is still there. Is it a case of adding more silverware? Is it more important to maybe get closer to City and Liverpool? What's kind of your expectation for the last few months of this season?
I would like for the Premier League campaign to not just become an afterthought, because I think that's what it has become in previous seasons, because we have been fighting on other fronts, and it just we go into this malaise in the Premier League where we're just kind of struggling and limping over the line for Champions League qualification. I really don't think that should be happening this season. I think at the very least, Chelsea should be a decent third place. Like, we should be very comfortably third place. But yeah, we are in the Champions League, and there's obviously the history there and the confidence that we can defend that title quite well this year. Of course, it's all draw, permitting, isn't it? Chelsea got a decent run to the semi-final last year because we got Porto in the quarterfinals. This year we could run into Liverpool. This year we could run into Man City or Bayern. We don't know that yet, but I think it's big for Chelsea to obviously put up a stronger fight in the Champions League when defending the title as they did in 2012. In the FA Cup, it's always Chelsea have a great record of getting to the latter stages of that tournament as well. Again, draw permitting in these tournaments. That fifth round against Luton, which is a couple of days after the League Cup final, there's a hope we can get to, what would it be now, the last 8. So once you're getting into that, I mean, Chelsea have reached the final the last 2 years and lost. So there may be an internal thing where we finally go over the line and win the FA Cup again, because we haven't had great success at Wembley recently. So that hopefully can start to change on Sunday against Liverpool. It's weird. It's just what I'd like to see, because it's kind of this weird dilemma. And I know from probably an outside perspective, it sounds like you're being entitled, or sort of like you're not appreciating the chance. Chelsea could win. Sunday could be our third trophy of the season, which is just absolutely ridiculous when you think about it. But there still is, I think you have to throw in the fact that Chelsea, as a Premier League side, I'm still kind of feeling like there should be progression, and that still needs to be there heading into the summer. So, sounding selfish, I kind of want a strong end to the Premier League season, go as far as we can in the others, and hopefully pick up some more silverware.
And just finally then, in terms of Thomas Tuchel, obviously being there a little while, or not that long realistically compared
long
to
for
the
Chelsea standards.
Yeah, relatively long, yeah. What's the sort of feeling around him at the moment? There was a little bit of chatter that maybe things were starting to turn. There was that kind of Lukaku incident, and people weren't sure whether he'd handled that properly or not. There's been a few question marks, but what's the kind of a feeling about him heading into the rest of this season?
I think if you gauge a lot of Chelsea fans, full support for Thomas Tuchel, full backing. I actually think the Lukaku situation made Tuchel's position stronger. I think he came out of that situation looking a lot better than there was kind of concerns when we went into that week. I think it was because you had the Liverpool game where Chelsea came back from 2-0 down. And I think that was a massive thing for the players to come back from that and to kind of show that character and that performance against a top team like Liverpool. I think said a lot, because at 2-0 down, it could have got quite toxic that day. And I think the way he held himself after that in the press conferences before Spurs, I think he's handled the situation as well as he can. And I think when you ask Chelsea supporters, they can see the progression he's had and sort of the impact he's had on the squad. All these finals kind of prove this, and they believe under him we can win a Premier League title again. I think it's all about kind of upstairs, kind of the way Chelsea are looking to recruit this summer, the players we bring in, the players we sell, because our recruitment, especially in the attacking end of the pitch, hasn't been that good recently. So it's kind of figuring those things out heading into the summer, because I don't think there's any doubts about Tuchel. I think the way he handled the situation with Lukaku, the way he's handled things at Chelsea, the Champions League win is probably the best example of this, of the transformative effect he can have at Stamford Bridge. There are no doubts about him. And even if we lost this Sunday, I don't think that's going to radically change. I still believe that people are fully behind Tuchel and want to see his vision kind of realised at Stamford Bridge.
Yeah, well, hopefully for a Chelsea perspective, at least that can start to be the case on Sunday. Obviously, for Liverpool, very, very different thoughts. I think it should be a really interesting game, actually. I think it'll be quite close. And just before we do finish, I will ask you for an actual score prediction for how you think the game might play out. Do you think it will be close as well, or how are you sort of expecting it to go?
I don't think either coach would want the frantic first half as entertaining as it was again, especially Tuchel. I think he operates around control. Finals usually, it sounds so stereotypical, but you watch enough finals and a lot of them aren't that good to watch. Actually, from a neutral perspective, they are very cagey, they are very tense. They usually are decided by one goal. And I think that's the way Chelsea will want it to go. Actually, I think Chelsea will be looking to try and do what they did to Liverpool in March 2021, in terms of the Champions League final as well, trying to sit back and look for those moments in transition and try and be as effective as possible. I think particularly going down the sort of our left-hand side, Liverpool's right-hand side, and try and exploit space there. So I'm going to go 1-0. I'm probably just going to go for a Havertz goal because he seems to have a knack for doing it. He's kind of doing Didier Drogba's Chelsea career in reverse at the moment. So I'll go for that. But listen, I think it's going to be really close. I think if Liverpool score first, although we came back against them in January, I still kind of think at the moment, the way Liverpool are operating in terms of attack, I think it could be a very dangerous game for Chelsea at that point, particularly in a cup final as the game goes on. So these two teams have, it's been 2 draws so far. So it's very hard to predict, isn't it?
Yeah, it's going to be tight, I think, isn't it? I'm going to go 2-1 to Liverpool, I think. I fancy both teams to probably score at some point, but wouldn't massively surprise me at all if it went into extra time. But we will have to just wait and see what happens. They're not too long to go towards the game now. We've plenty of content pre-match and post-match coming your way across all the usual channels. You can catch that across the Liverpool Echo, liverpool.com, and Blood Red, of course, too. For now, though, thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. We'll be back very shortly indeed with all the best analysis and reaction. We'll see you then.